Welcome to the deep dive. You've brought us a fascinating stack of sources today, all centered around Michael Capuzzo's book, The Murder Room.
Yes.
We're not just looking at true crime here. We are stepping into the incredibly exclusive, almost secret world of the Vidocq Society.
That's absolutely right. And the mission of this deep dive is to really understand the structure, the methods, and, the inherent genius of this group.
Right.
They're often called the Cold Case College.
The Cold Case College. I like that.
Yeah. And the sources, they introduce us to this society that's entirely pro bono. They meet once a month in Philadelphia, and they're staffed by, well, some of the most renowned forensic experts in the world.
Polygraph experts, profilers, forensic artists.
Pathologists, you name it, the best of the best.
And their core mandate is really critical.
Right.
They only jump in on cases that are at least 2 years old.
The ones that have just gathered dust.
Exactly. The ones that have stumped, conventional police work.
Yeah.
And they operate as these quiet agents for justice.
It's all about assisting the local police, and only when they're asked.
Yeah, this isn't about getting credit. It's about resolution.
Resolution, not recognition. That's the key. And that quiet nature is totally intentional.
Sure.
They get that bringing in a bunch of outsiders, especially with their kind of federal connections, can, ruffle some feathers.
So they position themselves as a sort of silent forensic court of last resort.
Precisely. We also see that they sometimes grant an audience to private citizens, but that's only when corruption or incompetence is heavily suspected.
When the system itself has failed.
When the path to justice is just completely blocked.
What I find so compelling right from the start is the mythological framework the author uses to introduce the three founders.
Oh, it's brilliant.
It taps into this idea, what the sources call the voice of the species. These fundamental stories humanity tells itself about fixing a broken world.
In that structure, it always dictates that you need three essential figures.
The king, the knight, and the wizard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic way to conceptualize the specific types of genius you need for this kind of work.
Because you can't solve the impossible with just one skill.
No, you need the administrator, you need the fierce logician, and you need the intuitive seer.
And in the Vidocq Society, these roles are just crystal clear.
They really are.
You've got William Lynn Fleisher, the glue. He's the king. Or maybe the Fisher King.
Right, the master of structure, the guy who builds the round table and steers the whole ship through these huge bureaucratic hurdles.
Then you have Richard Walter, the legendary forensic profiler.
He's the knight, the Lancelot.
The warrior, just dedicated to hunting down evil using cold, hard, analytical logic.
He's the intellectual engine of the whole society.
And finally, Frank Bender, the intuitive genius, the artist.
He's Merlin. He's the wizard.
The seer who taps into something else, something beyond logic. He's the chaotic, unpredictable force.
And it's that synergy and also the tension between those three that really drives the incredible success stories we're about to get into.
Okay, so let's unpack these three titans. We should start with William Lynn Fleisher, the king.
The man who could get these fiercely independent federal agents to actually work together.
He wasn't just a connector, though. The sources paint him as this obsessive pursuer of truth.
His career path says it all, really. He starts as a Philadelphia beat cop, then moves to the FBI as a special agent.
And he rises incredibly high. He becomes the number 2 in charge of U.S. Customs law enforcement for 3 massive states.
But his real passion, his obsession, was the polygraph and interrogation.
Yeah.
He becomes a world-class examiner, a scholar of distinguishing truth from lies.
And what was driving that obsession? It wasn't just about, catching bad guys.
No, the sources point to this powerful undercurrent of redemption. He had this immense heart.
His own agent said he gained 100 pounds to make room for his heart.
It's an incredible line. He was obsessed with redeeming the victims society forgot, and also, maybe more controversially, seeking redemption for the criminals themselves through truth.
That immense heart, plus this mercurial personality.
He could be a bully, a loyal friend, a jokester.
It made him perfectly suited for that role of king. He was a force of nature, just a needle poking for truth until it bled.
And crucially, before Vidocq even existed, he had mastered the art of uniting rivals.
You're talking about the rival agencies.
Exactly. He famously started these monthly luncheons for the ASACs.
And for listeners, ASACs means Assistant Special Agents in Charge.
Right, from the FBI, Marshals, Customs, DEA, ATF, you name it, all these highly competitive territorial federal agents.
And Fleisher just forces them to the table.
He does, just so they could get to know each other personally and, maybe start to cooperate.
And that ability to forge alliances to make people set their ego aside for the bigger mission.
That was the entire foundation of the Vidocq vision. He knew he couldn't solve these cases if his experts couldn't work together, even with their wildly different approaches.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the most chaotic of the founders, the wizard, Frank Bender.
The wizard. And his very inspiration for the society's name is a whole story of transformation in itself.
Right, Eugene Francois Vidocq.
Bender was just completely fascinated by him. Born in 1775, Vidocq was nicknamed the Wild Boar.
A baker's son who becomes a killer, a con man, a highwayman.
A frequent prison breaker. And yet, this convicted criminal manages to completely transform himself.
He becomes the father of modern criminology.
Right in the middle of Napoleon's era, that figure of redemption and transformation,
Yeah.
it just clicked with Bender.
And Bender's own artistry was just as revolutionary.
They called him the Death Artist.
Yeah.
He could take these fragmented skeletal remains or decades-old photos and create these breathtakingly accurate three-dimensional busts.
It was so far beyond what traditional sketch artists were doing.
The early successes were stunning. They immediately showed the power of his method, like the case of Anna Duval, a murdered Jane Doe.
Bender produces a bust, and a detective in New Jersey sees a remarkable similarity to a missing person's photo from Chicago.
And it leads to a positive ID. Or another one, Linda Keys. Her bust runs in the paper. And her own father recognizes his daughter, identifies her after years of not knowing from 250 miles away.
I read that medical examiner Hal Fillinger was just stunned.
He couldn't believe it. This full, three-dimensional, accurate head had come from a high school-educated kid who didn't even know what the word forensics meant when he started.
He was running on pure visceral intuition.
And that intuition, that chaotic genius, it just permeated his entire life, especially his domestic arrangement.
Which he called the balance.
The balance. He was married to Jan, who was his rock, immensely proud of his gifts. But the author suggests that his intense work, exploring death every single day, it fueled this equally immense, voracious lust for life and sex.
That's a fascinating psychological link. He's so close to death, he feels this overwhelming need to maximize life's pleasure.
And Jan was apparently supportive. She even encouraged him to have a girlfriend or two.
As long as she met them first for her blessing.
Right. And the sources detail this incredible arrangement, the bouillabaisse, as Bender called it.
His wife Jan found relief when he found a steady woman, Joan.
The taller, buxom blonde. She was his art assistant, his accountant, his business manager, and his mistress on Tuesday nights.
And Jan was relieved to have someone help satisfy Frank's overwhelming needs.
Bender genuinely felt he couldn't get rid of that chaos, that unconventional life, without losing his artistic gift.
That's the wizard for you. Chaos and genius all tangled up.
Exactly.
So we move from that intuitive chaos to the man who sought absolute order, Richard Walter, the Knight.
And his background is, terrifyingly appropriate for a killer profiler.
20 years treating and controlling violent psychopaths in Michigan's toughest prisons, Jackson and Marquette.
Walter was an intellectual machine, acerbic, rigidly cynical. He spoke with this clipped propriety that got him the nickname the Englishman, even though he was American.
And he was known for that piercing gaze, the Marquette stare.
A look he used to just bore into the souls of the toughest inmates, forcing them to drop their facade.
He was obsessed with control, an orderly mind that saw all complexity as just a system to be solved.
The sources say he set a school record at Michigan State by taking 11 courses in one semester.
Why?
Simply because he felt compelled to seek out challenges that other people thought were impossible.
His control was absolute and sometimes just terrifyingly cold. That story about his father's death is chilling.
It is. His father passes away, and Walter just goes to work, attends a scheduled meeting, acts perfectly calm.
And when someone asked, he just said, "This morning, about 2 hours ago."
Without a flicker of emotion.
Yeah.
That night, looking in the mirror, he was genuinely shaken by the cold eyes staring back at him. He deliberately sacrificed the easy pleasures of life to be one of the 5 best in the world in his field.
And that obsession with control, it manifested directly in his work at Jackson Prison.
Which was then the world's largest walled prison. He was in charge.
He could turn off inmates' hot showers by remote switch, put them on a restricted diet of prison loaf.
His governing philosophy was chillingly direct.
Yeah.
You will learn to control yourself, or I will control you.
And in terms of his intellectual contribution, he's absolutely
Oh,
crucial.
massively.
Yeah.
He was part of that small pioneering group of American criminologists, along with guys like Robert Ressler.
Who coined the term serial killer.
Right. They co-invented modern criminal profiling in the 70s and 80s. And for Walter, theory was useless unless it was functional.
His mantra was that knowledge is most valuable when understood and applied.
Exactly.
What's so clear, even before we get into the cases, is the magnificent friction here. You have the emotional king, the chaotic wizard, and the utterly controlled knight. How on earth do you get those three to work on the same problem?
Well, the friction actually is the answer. It's a creative tension. Their different methods proved to be the magic formula for solving cases that everyone else had just tossed aside.
And the best example of this synergy is probably their most famous case.
The John List case. Without a doubt.
The church-going accountant who, in 1971, murders his entire immediate family, his wife, his mother, his 3 children, and then just vanishes for 18 years.
And it was a meticulous crime.
Meticulous is an understatement.
Right. List executed his family in this huge suburban home in New Jersey. He even brought his youngest daughter home from school and killed her before her older siblings got back.
He prepared lunch, ate it at the kitchen table where he'd killed his wife that morning, and then washed the dishes.
And then calmly slept in the basement beneath his murdered family before leaving notes and just disappearing into the night.
Walter believed he slept soundly because for List, it had been a wonderful day.
A day where he finally exerted absolute, permanent control.
So the police hit a dead end for almost 2 decades because the photos of List were so old.
They were trying to find a man who looked like he did in 1971, not who he looked like in 1989.
And this is where Walter and Bender step in, each one leveraging their unique genius.
Walter, the profiler, creates the psychological blueprint. He knew the man couldn't shed his core identity.
So control-obsessed, highly structured, a devout Lutheran.
And he'd almost certainly gravitate back toward accounting work. He even predicted List would consistently wear a suit, a tie, and glasses, the uniform of respectability and order.
Then Bender, the wizard, provides the visual. He takes those old, stale photographs
and creates a forensic bust, showing exactly how List would look 18 years later. He factored in aging and critically predictable weight gain for a man living that kind of sedentary life, hiding in plain sight.
It was the perfect synthesis of logic and art.
Absolutely. The bust was aired on America's Most Wanted.
And that single image, the combined force of Walter's psychological prediction and Bender's artistic imagination.
It led to a tip that identified a Bob Clark, an accountant living quietly in Richmond, Virginia.
And the capture is just legendary. Bob Clark is arrested at his accounting firm.
Wearing a bow tie and large glasses.
Exactly as Walter had predicted. Fingerprints confirmed he was John List.
And Walter's profile was, as they say, right on. List had fled to Colorado, took the alias Bob Clark, found an accounting job, and taught Sunday school at a Lutheran church.
That arrest made Bender an international figure. The New York Times hailed the bust on the front page.
It cemented the idea that forensic art was a viable, powerful tool for justice.
Okay, now let's look at a case that really highlights the tension between them. The case of the missing face.
Yes. This was the skeletal remains of a small woman found in a shallow grave in Manlius, New York.
The skull was severely smashed, and police had practically nothing to go on.
Even the FBI refused to profile it. They just labeled it impossible.
But it was a fascinating challenge. Walter, who never backed down from the impossible, he tried the profile anyway.
Right. And based purely on the nature of the crime, the remote burial, the extreme violence of the smashed skull, he suggested a power-driven serial killer.
Someone who targeted vulnerable women, probably prostitutes.
And he narrowed it down to an initial suspect, a man named Updegrove. He declared only Updegrove fits the profile.
And Bender, operating on that pure gut feeling that defined his genius.
He immediately just blurted out, "I don't think Updegrove did it."
The knight was not impressed.
Not at all. Walter, with his typical wit, dismissed him instantly. He famously snapped, "Frank, I appreciate your thoughts, okay, but you'd best stick to your day job. You're like a fart in a bathtub."
It's a crude line, but it perfectly captures Walter.
Deliberately abrasive, absolutely confident in his logic, and totally dismissive of what he saw as unscientific guesswork.
But the tension was productive. Bender went ahead with the facial reconstruction from the fragmented bones.
And the power of that finished bust was just undeniable. It led to the victim's identification, Lorian Quincy Weaver, a missing prostitute.
And the ultimate resolution, it sort of validated both of them, but in different ways.
It did. Lorraine Weaver's killer, a man named Pat Node, confessed after seeing her photo distributed publicly. He called her his ghost.
The confession confirmed Walter's assessment of the type of killer.
Right, Pat Node was a serial killer who strangled, beat, and violated the corpse. It fit the power-driven assault profile perfectly.
But Pat Node was not up to Grove.
Exactly. Bender's initial intuition that Walter's specific suspect was innocent was proven correct.
This case, more than any other, shows why the king needed both the knight's logic and the wizard's intuition.
It really does.
Yeah.
And just one more quick example of Walter's genius for tracking down men trying to shed their skin. The case of Robert Thomas Noose.
The sadistic leader of the Warlock biker gang.
This was a spectacular escape. Noose, convicted of murder, and his accomplice broke out of prison in a hollowed-out pine armoire.
A literal movie-like escape. And the marshals were left with photos that were 17 years old.
Walter's profile was key. He understood Noose as a classic Jekyll and Hyde. A man that violent would reject the chaos of his biker life and try to blend into a stable, middle-class world.
He predicted he'd hide in the Michigan suburbs, the most unassuming place he could find.
And he was right again. Noose was found living in Luna Pier, Michigan as Rick Ferrer. A devoted husband, father of 3, even owned a boat.
He'd shaved the biker beard, cut his hair short.
Walter even pointed out he had a Cadillac in the driveway. It fit the profile of a man trying desperately to project stability and convince the world, and maybe himself, that he was utterly respectable.
So the knight and the wizard solved the ID problems, but it was the king, Fleisher, who was there to close the deal, often through interrogation.
And Fleisher wasn't just experienced, he was considered the master. His polygraph expertise, which in his hands consistently showed an accuracy rate better than 95%.
It was a foundational element of the society's power.
The polygraph, while controversial in court, was a supreme tool of psychology for Fleischer. It wasn't about the machine's reliability, it was about the psychological sales job he performed.
Which brings us to his most brilliant technique, the everything must go sale.
It's a perfect name for it.
So let's get into that. What are the mechanics? It sounds more like a negotiation than an interrogation.
It absolutely is a negotiation, but one where the outcome is already decided. The interrogator's goal is to convince the suspect that the police already have overwhelming, irrefutable evidence.
Usually DNA.
Right. That conviction is inevitable. They have to communicate to the killer. Confessing now is your only chance to control the narrative, salvage a shred of dignity, and maybe get a slightly better deal.
So it leverages the killer's own paranoia and obsession with control.
Exactly. You tell them time is everything. You got to act now. The clock is ticking. You sell the idea that if they wait and the DNA evidence comes back next week, they lose all their negotiating power. The jury will see them as an unrepentant monster.
You're appealing to their self-interest, not their conscience.
Precisely.
And we see that synergy profiling, forensic persistence, and interrogation play out perfectly in the Terry Brooks murder in triplicate case.
The horrific 1984 killing of a restaurant assistant manager in Bucks County.
She was found severely beaten, strangled, and then, this is the most disturbing part, pinned to the kitchen floor by a butcher knife through her throat.
The police initially assumed a robbery gone wrong because the safe was ransacked.
But Walter immediately challenged that premise. He used his knight-like logic and asked the critical question, who cared enough to kill her 3 times?
3 distinct modes of attack. A robbery is messy, but usually fast. Beating, strangling, and the final knife thrust indicated profound personal rage.
So the VSMs refocused the investigation away from random robbery to a domestic murder. They argued she'd unlocked the door for someone she knew.
But the real breakthrough relied on the incredible foresight of one of the VSMs, medical examiner Hal Fleischer.
Fleischer had done the 1984 autopsy and had flawlessly saved the critical DNA evidence.
Hair and skin from under Brooks's fingernails from her fight for her life. This was long before DNA was routine in cold cases. That preservation was the foundation for the entire case, 15 years later.
The suspect quickly became Alfred Scott Keefe, Brooks's fiancé.
He was angry at her for seeking a promotion and worried she was seeing someone else. So the police, acting on the VSM's instructions, needed his DNA for a comparison.
And the way they got it is classic police work. They collected a discarded Newport filter cigarette butt from his curbside trash.
The saliva on the butt was the match they needed.
So on the 15th anniversary of the murder, Keefe, now a peacemaker still living with his mother, was brought in for questioning.
He was shaking violently. When the usual methods failed, Fleischer's partner Gordon stepped in.
And he delivered the everything must go sale.
He convinced Keefe the evidence was overwhelming and that his only hope for retaining any humanity in the eyes of the court was to confess now.
And Keefe did confess, secured a first-degree murder charge, all thanks to Fillinger's foresight and the VSM's strategic direction.
The VSMs also applied that same collective gaze to the most disturbing unsolved case of Fleischer's youth, the 1962 Carol Ann Doherty case in Philadelphia.
A fifth grader brutally raped and murdered in the choir loft of St. Mark's Porch.
This scene was just gruesome. Semen, pubic hairs, a fingerprint on her hairband, and the use of a cincture.
Which is the rope-like belt a priest wears.
To strangle her. The discovery was so traumatic that a crowd of 1,000 people gathered outside the church that night, demanding justice.
The police had long suspected the parish priest, Father Sabadish. He had refused to comfort the victim's family.
And he'd been seen acting bizarrely right after the murder, asking a shoe clerk for the time even though he was wearing a watch, and then strangely asking, "Do you sell underwear?"
A clumsy attempt to create a false alibi.
It had to be. Fleischer and the VSMs were absolutely confident. It was the priest. They pushed investigators to finally test the decades-old DNA evidence.
And while justice was tragically delayed, the VSM's initial conviction was eventually validated.
In 2005, a Philadelphia grand jury investigation confirmed that Father Sabadish was one of 63 pedophile priests the archdiocese had quietly transferred around to conceal abuse.
It confirmed what they'd suspected all along. The killer was hidden in plain sight, protected by institutional silence. Shifting back to Richard Walter, we really get into the most psychologically complex part of this deep dive, understanding the killer's mind.
Walter didn't just profile, he dissected the why.
Which brings us to the absolutely bizarre case of Antoine Le Havre.
The man Walter profiled as the killer based on nothing but his demeanor.
It was such an arrogant move by the killer. Le Havre, a wealthy furniture manufacturer, he comes to the Vidocq Society for help solving his employee's murder.
Paul Lane's murder. And Le Havre suggests mob-connected bouncers did it. He presents himself as this concerned citizen seeking justice.
And Walter uses only Le Havre's presentation, his voice, his mannerisms, his story, to profile him as the murderer.
He noted Le Havre's grand, slightly overinflated presence and what he called a covered, macho, effeminate voice.
Walter's analysis was just ruthless. He immediately dismissed the Ma hit theory.
Bouncers don't kill people, they throw them out of bars.
Instead, he argued Le Havre murdered Elaine for the pure pleasures of power and control.
And that he was enjoying the dangerous game of catch me if you can by presenting his perfect crime to the best detectives in the world. It was the ultimate narcissistic power play.
And Walter delivers this chilling confrontation directly to Le Havre.
He says, the first rule of murder is the murder isn't over until the murderer says it is, and you, sir, are attempting to extend the pleasure of murder by exploiting all of us here today.
Le Havre left in a rage, threatening lawsuits. Fleischer, the pragmatist, was uncomfortable.
He pointed out there was zero physical evidence, just intuition.
But Bender, the wizard, he just grinned and called the case solved right then and there.
Another Vidocq Society lunch, another murder solved.
It says so much about the level of confidence these men operated with, sometimes well beyond what would be legally admissible.
It does.
Now, let's look at Walter's detailed profile in the Laisha Hamilton case, focusing on what he called the power-assertive, or PA, killer.
The Laisha Hamilton case was the 1990 murder of Scott Dunn in Lubbock, Texas. A gruesome scene.
The victim disappeared, but the crime scene was a bloodbath, with blood spatter halfway up the walls.
But no body and no weapon were ever found.
And Texas law at the time made that very challenging. No body, no murder.
Right. Walter profiled Scott's live-in girlfriend, Laisha Hamilton, as the killer. A psychopathic, power-assertive killer.
His profile detailed her as a power-hungry, manipulative woman who used younger men through a combination of sex and intimidation.
And the critical motive was that Scott had decided to dump her for a decent girl. In Walter's mind, that sealed Scott's fate.
Because the PA killer views rejection not as a slight, but as a complete destruction of their engineered reality.
He phrased it perfectly. If anything is going to get you killed, it's to reject the psychopath and say, I'm better than you are.
The power-assertive type has to reestablish dominance, and that means the victim has to cease to exist on their terms.
The local authorities were highly skeptical because there was no body. So Walter, who was famously not liking to fuck around, forced a meeting with the Lubbock DA, Travis Ware.
And the DA sits there with his foot on the desk, a clear attempt to establish dominance.
Walter noted the behavior, silently thinking, Laisha's not the only PA in the room.
But Walter was prepared for the skepticism. He brought a crucial report from his contact, Dr. Richard Shepard.
A forensic pathologist consulting for Scotland Yard. The report analyzed the blood spatter and proved conclusively that enough blood was spilled to cause death.
So Walter argued the body was right there in the forensic pathology report.
And that conviction led to Hamilton's successful conviction and a 20-year sentence. But the end of the case deeply disturbed Walter.
Her accomplice, Tim Smith, an easily seduced evangelical Christian neighbor who helped dispose of the body.
And clean the bloodbath.
He received only 10 years probation from a sympathetic jury.
Walter was incensed. He saw it as a moral failure. He wrote that the jury attempted to do God's work of forgiveness when they should have done the work of the state of Texas.
To Walter, that jury just let Smith get away with it.
And this deep, decades-long immersion into the darkest parts of the human psyche eventually led Walter to formalize his most complex and terrifying work, the helix.
He called it the most dangerous knowledge in the world.
A strictly proprietary, handwritten 8-step model that charts the inexorable descent into sadism.
The helix is so terrifying because it outlines this predictable, escalating path. It suggests sadists aren't just born fully formed, they follow a specific psychological checklist.
It starts, seemingly benignly, with fetishism, a lust for women's shoes or underwear.
Walter notes all sadists have fetishes, but crucially, not all fetishists become sadists.
But once a man enters the helix, the pathology is insatiable, when the fetish is no longer enough.
He progresses to voyeurism and other stages, seeking more risk, more control, but without direct physical contact at first.
So the pathology keeps accelerating, moving through threats and intimidation, and eventually to picarism.
That's a crucial dark phase where the killer gets sexual satisfaction from cutting, stabbing, or slicing human flesh.
We know this type from cases like the Tower Killer or Son of Sam. The act of injuring becomes the pleasure.
And if that boundary is crossed, Walter says there's no going back. The final descent is into full-blown sadism.
Right. And sadism at this stage isn't just brutal murder. It requires a complex ritual of dominance, degradation, and dread.
The killer's goal is to prolong the experience, to systematically torture the victim, to maximize that feeling of control over time.
The sexual gratification only truly comes when the killer has achieved absolute final dominance, often after the victim is dead or mutilated.
And the sources use Ted Bundy as the classic example. He couldn't expose himself emotionally or sexually until after he had killed his victim.
Exactly. Bundy often took the head as a souvenir and only felt in control enough to be fully sexual with it in the privacy of his lair.
The helix shows us that this kind of violence isn't random. It's a meticulously designed psychological ladder that the killer climbs, seeking ever more potent forms of perverse satisfaction. And that psychological expertise brings us to the ultimate challenge for the Vidocq Society, and specifically for Walter, the oldest and most tragic cold case on Philadelphia's books.
The 1957 murder of the boy in the box, known for decades as America's unknown child.
This case just haunted the VSMs, especially the former Philly cops in the group like Kelly and McGillen.
The boy, maybe 4 years old, was found severely beaten and bruised, wrapped in a blanket, and stuffed in a cardboard box in the Fox Chase woods.
For decades, the investigation had proceeded on what the VSMs realized was a completely wrong premise.
The premise was that the boy was accidentally killed by loving but panicking caretakers, that the death was a mistake, and the body was disposed of out of fear.
The police were looking for a panicked, regretful family.
But the sheer brutality of the injuries in the VSM's eyes that ruled out panic.
So, fueled by advancements in DNA and this moral imperative, the VSMs demanded a reckoning. In 1998, they got a court order for a dramatic exhumation.
After 41 years in Potter's Field, it was a powerful moment. The boy was described as remarkably preserved.
Some of the VSMs saw it as a sign from the Almighty demanding justice.
And they were able to recover a single tooth for DNA testing, the great hope for an identification.
But Walter focused his night's eye on the forensic evidence.
His grim assessment of the preserved bones and the old autopsy photos proved conclusively that the accidental death premise was false. The injuries were, as he called them, polymorphic perverse.
That term, polymorphic perverse, that needs a definition.
It means multiple forms of extreme long-term torture. The injuries included burns, probably from cigarettes, needle insertions here and there, and injuries indicating head pressure, squeezing his head real tight with hands or implements or a vise.
That is just a staggering finding. It confirms not a moment of panic, but an extended pattern of sadistic abuse.
The boy wasn't a victim of a terrible mistake. He was the focus of complex, ritualistic dominance, which fits perfectly into Walter's Helix model.
Exactly. This was the work of the heaviest and most complicated of subtypes. The full-blown sadist who got satisfaction from the process of killing.
Seeking to maximize the experience of emasculation over months, even years, turning the boy into a compliant prop in some sick secret drama.
This horrific analysis is what made Walter take the librarian killer theory so seriously.
A lurid old story told by a woman named Mary to her therapist years earlier.
Mary claimed her respected librarian mother had tortured and killed a boy named Jonathan, who was kept hidden in their basement coal bin.
On the surface, it sounds like a fantasy, a child's nightmare.
So why did Walter conclude this story makes perfect sense?
Because of the irony. Walter understood that for this type of sadist, the perverse excitement came not just from the torture itself, but from the ability to maintain a veneer of absolute respectability.
The killer likely lived a suburban life, the June Cleaver image, while secretly hiding a monster in the basement.
The VSMs even located Mary's old row house, where neighbors recalled the conservative teacher and librarian and completely dismissed the story as impossible.
Which, for Walter, only reinforced its likelihood. The killer reveled in the secrecy.
This led Walter to a state of profound moral outrage. He was convinced the killer, now decades older, was likely still alive.
A decrepit shell of wantonness and stale pleasure, living alone, maybe smelling of booze.
And still actively reveling in the memory, perhaps reading the old newspaper clippings.
He found the decades of unpunished freedom for such a monster to be a profound offense to decency. Walter, the knight, believed justice had to be achieved, even if only symbolically.
His reaction was pure, relentless vengeance. He declared again that the murder isn't over until the murderer says it is.
Yeah.
And since the murderer was unlikely to confess, the VSMs needed to force the issue.
He shared a plan with Joe O'Kane, the burly federal agent and VSM.
A simple, aggressive plan that bypassed all bureaucracy. They'd go to the suspect's row house, push their way past the old man, who would undoubtedly refuse to let them in.
And Walter would deliver the full force of the Marquette stare that look used to bore into the soul.
And then deliver the chilling, provocative line he had prepared. "My dear fellow, it's high past time you and I had a man-to-boy chat."
The plan, whether it was ever executed or not, was the ultimate declaration of war against the killer's ongoing victory. The Vidocq Society's legacy, so powerfully detailed in the murder room, it really lies in showing that justice, especially for the coldest cases, is only achievable when you blend skills that bureaucratic systems normally keep separate.
It requires that complementary power of the king, the knight, and the wizard.
Fleisher, the king, provided the indispensable infrastructure, the emotional core, and that mastery of truth-finding.
Securing confessions using psychological methods like the everything must go sail. Walter, the knight, contributed the cold, intellectual rigor, the power to synthesize a fragmented crime scene into a detailed psychological blueprint.
Like the PA killer profile.
Right, and Bender, the wizard, he provided the intuitive visual genius that could literally give the dead a face.
Turning scattered remains into an identity, and offering that artistic, gut-driven insight that could sometimes trump the profiler's pure logic.
As we saw in the Laurie and Weaver case?
Their work underscores this fundamental, enduring battle for decency against evil. They proceed often in spite of legal obstacles, bureaucratic inertia, public sentimentality.
They stand for truth, even when that truth, like the complex sadism in the Boy in the Box case, is incredibly difficult to face.
The sources quote Walter saying, "A lot of people in this country get away with murder, a lot more than I thought."
And the Vidocq Society exists as a vital check against that grim reality, to make sure the killers who thought they got away with it are held accountable.
It's important for you, the listener, to reflect on that moral debt, especially with the boy in the box.
Even after the boy was reburied, and given a marker that read, "God bless this unknown boy," the debt remains unpaid. The killer, if still alive, views those decades of freedom as his greatest triumph.
Proof that he won.
What stands out most is Walter's core belief, repeated again and again. The murder isn't over until the murderer says it is.
And since the murderer will not willingly surrender that final, appalling arrogance, the enjoyment of his victory, the only way to end the murder is through confrontation.
It makes you realize that every cold case is a living, breathing victory for the killer until someone forces them to acknowledge the truth.
So the final provocative question for you to consider is this. In the face of bureaucratic failure and decades of institutional indifference, what role does that fundamental drive for righteous wrath, the desire to force a final, personal confrontation, play in the pursuit of justice?
Is that righteous fury essential to achieving the final step when logic and law have already failed?
A truly chilling and essential question to end our deep dive. We hope you feel thoroughly informed on the heirs of Sherlock Holmes and their relentless, unconventional pursuit of justice in the Cold Case College.